Yo guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about different flow techniques you can use when making rhythm. Let's get into the video. Alright, so we're just going to use my track SPACEKNIFE for an example because there's a lot of different flow changes and switches in here. I'll just play a little bit of it and then we can start to break stuff down. And then we got like... And then yeah, so there's a couple different flow switches, so we can go through and break down each of these sections. The first thing I want to talk about is time signatures. So right here we have an 8-bar section. So you can change your phrases every 4 bars, every 8 bars, every 16 bars. That might get a little bit repetitive if you do every 16, but I like to just kind of do every 8 because it kind of breaks it up enough to where the flow changes, but it keeps it repetitive enough to keep it danceable. So for instance, this right here, right? I have these first 4 bars and then I start to repeat these right here again. So on this 6th bar right here, you expect the same flow to come in because I'm repeating the flow from the first 4 bars. So if I were to go and I change the flow on the 6th bar, it'll be really jarring and feel out of place, right? Let's play this like this. Right, so the only change is at the very end of the phrasing to kind of give a call and response to the switch, right? Say I were to go in here and start to change the flow for the last section, right? Maybe just go with like a quarter note pattern. So when I play this, it's going to feel really out of place because you're going to expect this first 4-bar section to repeat. So let's hear it. See, it just like, it feels really out of place because it's on the 6th bar. So paying attention to time signatures and keeping things danceable is really important when it comes to flow. There's always an exception to that. Like at the end of this phrase, you can see that I have this glitch that kind of gives a call and response to the next section. Right here we have... So by changing this very, very last section of this phrasing, it's kind of putting a tie on this entire phrase, but the flow remains the same throughout the entire section. So another example for my B section, everything kind of stays the same throughout it. There's very, very small differences, but the overall flow stays the same. The first hit of this, we have... and then that repeats, but then on the 4th bar I have a slight switch. Instead of it doing da-da-da-da, it has more of a glitch into it. So we have... right, but then on the second part of the B section we have... right, it just makes it a little bit more unique, but the overall flow stays the same throughout the entire section, and it's not enough of a change to where it's going to throw you off. And for the final example of that, for the very first part of this, we have... whereas on the 4th bar, again, we have another change. But in the context of the entire phrase, it makes sense. But if I were to take this, right, delete that, and put this on the 6th bar, but then repeat this, right, it's not going to really make as much sense. So let's hear this. Right, it sounds really out of place and it doesn't really fit. By having it like this, it just continues that flow and allows it to be danceable. And I would say that's one of the main mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to flow in rhythm songs, is just having certain stuff kind of out of place as far as time signatures go. You can be really, really creative within your time signatures, but if you start like making changes outside of your time signature, it's going to throw off the danceability of it when those changes come in. Another thing I want to talk about is consolidating tracks. So right here we just have our synths, right? And they're coming out of our synths. But say I want to take this, let's just go ahead and make this unique real quick. Yeah, I'm going to delete the sub real quick, just so we have just this. just gonna highlight this and do consolidate tracks, time selection, right? Consolidate that. And now we have an audio version of that. And so now with this, we can start to put this on effects racks. We can change different tonalities of it within this. That sounds terrible, but with certain sounds, this area can be kind of cool. Another thing you can do is like stretch it. So we have, but if we stretch this real small, we can do something like this where we have. So by consolidating your waveforms into audio, you can get a lot of different cool flow and stuff like that out of it. That's what I did with this sound right here. This is a consolidated sample. With this, I can layer it and do a lot of different things. So my original synth is at 1/4, and then I layered it with this at 1/8, so it has this. It has that different flow to it. Another thing I do a lot is these like little glitches, so I just take one of these and I just repeat it a bunch of times. It gives you that nice stutter glitch effect. It's really good for like fills or ending out phrases and stuff like that. For this B section here, I have a long note to break up that flow. So instead of just going 1/8, 1/8, 1/8, right into another 1/8 or even 1/4, I go into a long note just to break it up at that start of the hit. So. And then instead of after the long note going right back into 1/4, I have this little stutter right before it, so it has that like little roll into it. Doing small little subtle stuff like this can just make it a little bit more unique and sound a little bit better than as if you just did this. Right, that little roll right there gives it that like, it sounds a lot better. Another thing that I really like to do for flow is ending fills and starting fills and using negative space. Instead of just going all the way till the end of the phrase, I stop it at the snare and give it like that small break to come back into the next phrase. You can do this at the end of a phrase, at the start of a phrase. Sometimes you can do it in the middle of the phrase. It just depends. There's always an exception for everything. But really at the end of phrases and the beginning of phrases, it can work really well. And here's a good example of where I did it kind of in the middle of a phrasing. So because the first hit of this bar is kind of a negative space, I wanted to kind of create a response to that right here in the middle of this phrasing. So... So it just kind of gives it that same flow as the first part. It's kind of like utilizes the negative space and then hits on the snare. And I kind of wanted to do the same thing over here. Another thing you can do is have like little fake out sections. So a bar or 2 bars without any drums and then have the drums come back in. And that can create a lot of flow and groove. So right here... I don't have any drums for the first bar, and I have my kick coming in kind of on the upbeat, which kind of gives it a little bit more groove. See, like if I were to put this here, this is how it sounds. And that sounds fun, but by putting it on the upbeat, it just gives it that little bit more groove. Alright, so that brings us into drums. So another thing you can do to create a lot of flow in your songs is with your drums. What a lot of people do is they'll just put their kick on every downbeat, so it's like this. But by doing little subtle things like putting one on an upbeat, right, now you have this whole other groove to it. It just has a little bit more of a flow. Another thing I really like to do is with my snares, like if you can see this snare right here has a little hit right before it, so... And it just gives it more flow. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is I'll add a delay to my 4th snare in every 4 bars, and it just makes it a little bit more interesting. Also for my B section, I have another layer of hats that come in. So on the first section we have this, and on the B section we have this. And by adding another layer of hats right here, it just gives it another energy change for the switch. If we hear it coming in from the A section, we have this. right? It's very subtle, but you can hear it if you listen closely. It just makes the B section have a lot more energy when it comes in. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Hopefully this helped you with your flow. Hopefully you learned something, and we will see you guys in the next one. Peace, guys.